Good afternoon, everybody. You know it's going to be a good briefing when you have former PRS director and acting assistant secretary Elizabeth Trudeau in the audience. So let's see how today fares. I don't have anything off the top, so wire colleagues, any of you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure, I can go. Vedant, can you talk what's the latest at Rafah border crossing? Is it open? Is it shut?
Sure. So our understanding is that given a security circumstance that the Rafah border crossing remains closed today, but this is something that we are continuing to work with in partnership with the government of Egypt and the government of Israel towards safe passage for more U.S. citizens, eligible family members, and lawful permanent residents to be able to exit. The number of American citizens, LPRs, and eligible individuals to have departed Gaza continues to be at more than 400. The number I provided up yesterday, I don't have any additional updates at this time. But as we've said previously, and as you all have seen from where you sit, this is an incredibly fluid situation. The border crossing has opened on many instances and allowed for the safe facilitation of exit of foreign nationals, of those who've sought it. So this is something we'll continue to work towards.
Right, so just to confirm, there's been no outbound, inbound traffic at all through Rafah today?
It remains closed,
right.
Is our understanding.
And in your conversations with Egyptians, do they give at all a timeline on when it might be reopened?
Again, I'm just not going to parse into the specifics of the parameters, as our understanding is that its closure was because of a certain security circumstance. So our expectation is that once that circumstance is resolved, the crossing will be open at the regular intervals that it's been open, and the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza and the facilitation of foreign nationals interested in exiting will be able to do so.
Right, just one more thing. We understand that the negotiations mediated by Qatar over the hostages are still ongoing, and there's a chance that 10, 15 hostages might be released in exchange for 1 to 2 day humanitarian pause. Is that a proposal that U.S. is tracking?
We've seen those reports, and I certainly am not going to get into the specifics of any of our negotiations or discussions when it comes to the release of hostages. I will just reiterate that we have been working around the clock to determine the whereabouts of these hostages. We're working with the Israeli government on every aspect of this, including sharing intelligence, experts, offering our insight. As you also know, Deputy Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs Steve Gillen remains in Israel, and we are working extensively with our Israeli partners on this. Of course, we would welcome any news on the release of hostages, but I just don't have anything to offer on that specific reporting.
Sean, briefly, I know you're not going to get into the negotiations on this, but the U.S., of course, has been talking about a humanitarian pause. This idea of 1 to 2 days, perhaps, is that something that the U.S. would be amenable to? Is that something that's consistent with U.S. policy?
Sean, I touched a little bit on this yesterday, and I'm just not going to assign any kind of timeline or longevity to it. I think the important thing for us continues to be, one, the conditions being as such so that Hamas is not able to regroup, re-strengthen itself, position itself in a way to carry out its stated continued intent, which is to carry out violent terrorist attacks against Israel and its people. But we also want to ensure that conditions can be created that allow for the influx of humanitarian aid. We recognize and understand that more is needed, and we're working to address that. And lastly, we continue to want to create conditions that will allow for the release of these hostages. And that's something that you've seen the Secretary and the President call for when it comes to these humanitarian pauses.
Just briefly, forgive me if you might have answered this recently, but is there a number that you can give for the number of U.S. citizens who are among the hostages? Not among the wounded or anything, but among the actual hostages?
There has been some public reporting, Sean. We are at this time aware of approximately 10 Americans who remain unaccounted for, and we know that some of these individuals are among those that are being held hostage, but I don't have a more finite breakdown than beyond that. Saeed, go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. Can you just clarify to us the call by the President, apparently, for a 3-day pause or anything like this? I mean, I know that you talked about this, but could you elaborate on
Are
that?
you referring to any specific reporting site? I'm not sure what you're speaking about.
Last night, that the president, in his conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday, called for a 3-day pause so they can allow for the movement of hostages or negotiation and so on to know their name, details of everybody. Do you have any further or
What I
additional
can
information on this?
What I would say to that, Saeed, is that first, as it relates to any of the president's calls or engagements, the White House and the National Security Council has been putting readouts of those engagements, and I don't have any additional information to specifically parse that. What I will reiterate again, though, is that we are not going to assign a timeline on this, certainly not from up here, and that our priority continues to be a humanitarian pause that will allow for conditions to take place that we hope to end result in hostages being released, humanitarian aid continue to be able to be flowed into Gaza, and it being undertaken in such a way that Hamas is not able to regroup and re-strengthen itself.
Fair enough. But today, a Hamas spokesman, military spokesman, said that they offered to release 12 people, but they were on the cusp of actually doing that, achieving that, but then Israel sabotaged it. Do you know anything about that?
If Hamas is interested in releasing any of these hostages, they should do so. If they're saying that they have an interest in doing so, they should do so. The proof should be in the actions that they undertake. And so, if they have a desire to release hostages, we would welcome that.
Okay. So Secretary Blinken said today that a durable peace that the United States seeks after the war cannot include attempt to blockade or besiege Gaza or any reduction of the territory in Gaza. I mean, this is the first time that you put these things together, that you actually guys acknowledge that Gaza has been besieged for 16 years and probably was the impetus behind what happened on October 7th. So is this a new policy?
What this is about, Saeed, and I'm glad you caught that, and I hope the rest of you were all up early enough to catch that press conference in Tokyo. What this is about was identifying the longer term objectives and pathways that will help shape our approach to addressing some of the immediate needs that you've heard Matt, myself, others, including the Secretary, talk about on a day-to-day basis, whether that be humanitarian aid, whether that be the voluntary departure of foreign nationals and the release of hostages. These are about setting conditions for a durable peace and for durable security, and to frame our ongoing diplomatic efforts in that in mind. And they are encompassing of the things that you have heard the Secretary talk about this morning. No forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, not now and not when this conflict recedes. No longer being able to use Gaza as a platform and launching pad for violence and terrorist attacks against Israel and its people. As you heard me speak about yesterday, reoccupation of Gaza after this conflict ends is also not something we are interested in seeing. And as the Secretary so indicated, no additional attempts to blockade or besiege Gaza as well, and no reduction in Gazan territory. These are all things you saw the Secretary lay out because, again, this is about, in our point of view, laying out some objectives and a pathway that will help address our approach to these immediate needs.
And before I ask my last question, I just want to welcome. It's so good to see you.
Always welcome.
Really tremendous. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you about humanitarian aid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, today, reports coming out of Gaza show that Palestinians are only allowed like 3 liters of water a day, and the average person should have like 100 liters of water a day. Most of this water is not fit for consumption. It's seawater or unfit water and so on. Have you made any progress in terms of allowing more water? I mean, to turn in the spigots and so on to allow for the water to flow back to Gaza?
Saeed, we are working around the clock to address and take whatever steps we can to rectify the ongoing humanitarian situation in Gaza. To offer a little bit of an update, as of November 8th, approximately 650 trucks carrying humanitarian supplies have entered Gaza through the Rafah crossing. And on November 7th, yesterday, 81 trucks, primarily carrying food, medicine, health supplies, bottled water, and other hygiene products, crossed from Egypt into Gaza. I'm in no way trying to imply, Saeed, that this is enough. We know that we need to continue to pursue avenues so that additional aid and additional humanitarian aid can get into Gaza. And that is exactly what the Secretary, Special Envoy Satterfield, and others in the region are working around the clock to do. We recognize the severity of this, and we recognize that more needs to be done. It's exactly why Undersecretary Zaya is headed to Paris this week to represent the United States at a conference taking place on this very exact issue. And as the days progress, we hope to share more about our efforts on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The UN Secretary General Guterres today said that there's something, quote unquote, clearly wrong with Israel's military operations in Gaza as thousands of children were killed. I was wondering if you have anything to say on that, because you have been giving unconditional military support to Israel, and is the US still in the position of not drawing any red lines for Israel?
I'm not going to parse on the specifics or try to comment or critique the ongoing military operation from up here. It would simply just be inappropriate for me to do so. What I can say, and this is not the first time that you've heard me, the Secretary, or Matt, or others say this, dating back to October 7th, we have laid out in clear terms, and we have done so directly with our counterparts and our partners in the Israeli government, that there is a moral imperative, a strategic imperative, and a responsibility to distinguish between Hamas terrorists and Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And we'll continue to lay out that very clearly. And we have also raised directly that we believe that there are additional steps that can be taken by the Israeli government to ensure protection of civilians, and we'll be continuing to watch closely.
And do you have any update on your assessment on whether or not Israel is complying with the international law?
Again, you've heard me say this, that we expect this operation to be conducted in accordance with international law, something that, if I might add, something that not even Hamas is doing, but it continues to be our expectation that our Israeli partners do so. As it relates to any legal assessment or anything like that, I'm just not going to get into that from here. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam. I'd like to highlight the discrepancy, at least recently, in statements from the United States and Israel. Now, you saying the Israeli reoccupation of Gaza is unacceptable. The Israelis say they will have indefinite control of Gaza. You saying the protection of lives is of paramount importance that you just reiterated.
Yep.
The Israeli continue to indiscriminately bomb Gaza, killing thousands of civilians and children. Now, humanitarian pause is needed is the US statement, but they are continuing with full force, and you're also transferring $300 million worth of bombs. Now, is there a rift between the US and Israel, or is this just, words over media and it's business as usual?
First, as it relates to the comments about Gaza and occupation, I addressed this a little bit yesterday, and I'd refer you to the Prime Minister's office and the government of Israel to further contextualize and clarify any comments that they've made. I will reiterate and echo again from up here that we are not interested in seeing a reoccupation of Gaza. That's not something we are pursuing, nor is it something that we have heard from our Israeli partners either. But beyond that, we continue to believe that Israel has every right to defend itself, to defend its security as it undertakes this operation. What Israel had to deal with and the attack that it was unleashed on its people would be unacceptable by any country, and in reference to the attacks on October 7th. We have also been very direct with our Israeli partners that there is a imperative to distinguish between Hamas terrorists and civilians, and that's something that we will continue to make clear at the highest levels.
Just quick.
Sure.
But what do you think is the reason for the discrepancy, this divergence in public remarks between the two governments?
I don't speak for the government of Israel, so that's a question that you should ask them. But beyond that, I do not believe that there is necessarily a discrepancy. Michelle, go ahead.
What does it mean, the elimination of Hamas for the U.S.? And do you think that Israel is able to eliminate them?
Well, you've heard us be very clear about this before, that we believe that Hamas is a terrorist organization, one that has a very clear track record of carrying out violent terrorist attacks on the Israeli people. I needn't point further than the attacks that were unleashed on October 7th. And so, of course, we are supportive of efforts that are being undertaken to not only hold Hamas accountable, but to ensure that the activities and events that took place on October 7th can never, ever again be repeated. And that's why we believe that Israel has every right to defend itself and defend its security. And but beyond that, I'm just not going to comment on the ongoing operation. Barbara.
Vedant, now that the Israelis are circling in on Gaza and they're getting closer to the Shifa hospital, what would be the U.S. advising them on whether or not to strike it, given that they've talked about Hamas's extensive command and control center underneath? Would you be saying they should hold back?
It's important to remember, Barbara, that when we talk about the scope to which Hamas has integrated and co-located itself throughout civilian infrastructure, through its network of tunnels and otherwise, that's not hyperbole. That's something that there is a very clear track record of. That being said, it is, of course, and very important to us to ensure that this operation is conducted in accordance with international law, that efforts are taken to minimize civilian casualties, and so that is something that we'll continue to raise directly with our Israeli partners.
So you think that you agree that there's a Hamas command and control center under Shifa Hospital?
I'm not going to get into intelligence or operational assessments from up here. What I am simply saying is that when the United States, when entities across the U.S. government, when entities across the Israeli government say that Hamas has a track record of using civilians as human shields, when Hamas has a track record of co-locating itself and integrating itself amongst civilian infrastructure, that is not hyperbole, that is the truth. But beyond that, as it relates to conducting this ongoing military operation, I'm not going to comment or critique that from up here beyond reiterating what we've said before, that we expect this operation to be conducted in accordance with international law and steps be taken to minimize civilian casualties and the impacts on civilians.
But you have in the past said it's never right to hit a hospital. So in this case, would you say that, or would it be worth it? I mean, I'm just wondering if there would be
We're
some...
talking about hypotheticals, Barbara, and I'm just not going to get ahead of this process or operations.
I don't think the Israelis have been hypothetical about this.
I'm just not going to get ahead of this operation or comment on everything that happens as it relates to this military operation that's being conducted.
Just one final question,
Sure.
quickly. So you are not talking about a timeline for this humanitarian ceasefire. There's the report about Mr. Biden asking for 3 days from the Prime Minister, and then Mr. Netanyahu in his interview saying something like an hour here, an hour there. Is there actually something on the table that's being considered? I mean, without asking what exactly it is there something concrete being considered for a humanitarian pause with Israel?
I'm just not going to get into the specifics of these diplomatic discussions. I will just use this opportunity to say again that we are looking this in three different ways. The first, conditions being allowed to allow for the flow of increased humanitarian aid into Gaza. Two, conditions being created that will hopefully allow for additional and further release of hostages. And three, this happening in a way in which Hamas cannot regroup and re-strengthen itself. I think this morning in Tokyo, the secretary put it quite aptly when it comes to the various calls for a ceasefire that we're seeing from various corners of the world. That those who are calling for a ceasefire have an obligation to explain how to address the unacceptable result a ceasefire would bring, which is Hamas left in place, Hamas being left in place with more than 200 hostages, with the capacity and its continued stated intent of repeating its attacks from October 7th. Camilla, you've had your hand up. Sorry.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Vedant, and welcome back.
Thanks.
In addition to what the Secretary said at his presser this morning about what the U.S. doesn't want Gaza to look like, in the sense they don't want a reoccupation of Gaza, yesterday Mark Regev on NewsHour said that he believes that there will be a buffer zone that there, quote, that there needs to be after what we have been through. So is that something that the US is in agreement with in terms of the buffer zone? And then I have one more on fuel.
I think given where we are in this conflict, I'm just not going to get into the specifics of what is on or off the table beyond just reiterating what the Secretary says, which is there are some clear, very finite points of view that we bring to this as it relates to reoccupation, as it relates to governance. We continue to feel very strongly that it needs to be respective and reflectful of the will of the Palestinian people, and that ultimately we are interested in seeing a Gaza that is unified with the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. But beyond that, we're just not going to get ahead of this process as we continue to work in the day-to-day to address these immediate needs while also laying out a pathway for some longer-term objectives.
Just one more on fuel. An IDF spokesperson said last week that Israel will allow fuel to enter the Strip as and when hospitals run out and will need it. Does that not contradict what the US is trying to work towards to get fuel into the Strip? Are you in agreement with that particular parameter which has been set about hospitals waiting for hospitals to run out of fuel before fuel can go in?
I addressed this a little bit yesterday. Obviously, fuel is incredibly important for hospitals because there's, of course, a dire public health need, but as we also know that there are a number of other activities or actions that require the use of fuel, whether that be the desalination of water, the distribution of clean water, wastewater treatment, and so on and so forth. So beyond that, we recognize that there is a dire need for fuel, and we are working around the clock with Special Envoy Satterfield, with others, with the government of Israel, with Egyptian authorities, donors, and other aid agencies to see what avenues are possible to allow further fuel into Gaza for the benefit of civilians. Go ahead, in the green. Yeah.
Thank you. Yesterday, during the briefing at the White House, it was said that the State Department is solely responsible for managing the list of Americans who are in Gaza and need to leave. When the Rafah crossing reopened, although the United States are not responsible for the list itself of foreigners, what is the criteria for defining who can or who cannot leave Gaza Strip regarding foreigners? And the second question, if possible, if the U.S. agree with this limitation, limiting the number of foreigners who can or who cannot leave.
There's an important perspective to remember here, and that is first and foremost that this is not a crossing we control. This is not a crossing in which we really have much input into whether it can open or close. The role that we are playing is providing the best information to our partners in the Israeli government and the Egyptian government of American nationals, American citizens, LPRs, and eligible family members who have indicated a voluntary desire to depart Gaza. And at regular intervals, the Palestinian General Authority's Facebook page for Borders and Crossings posts a list of which foreign nationals are eligible to exit Rafah crossing on a particular day. And when we see which Americans are reflected on that list, we do our best to get in touch with them and ensure that they are able to make their way to Rafah to exit. When Rafah is open, American citizens, foreign nationals who may have had their names published on a previous day's list, our expectation is that those individuals will still be able to exit.
Can the U.S. diplomacy somehow help to push even Israelis or Egyptians in order to put more names in those lists?
We
from other countries.
We are continuing to work around the clock to ensure that Rafah crossing can be open as often as it needs to be to allow for the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, but also for the allowance of foreign nationals to be able to leave when they see fit. Lalit, go ahead. I think there's going to be a lot more on this, so I can come back to you later. Shannon, I think you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
Something you said about the Palestinian Authority a moment ago.
Yeah.
The Secretary's comments earlier today seem to be the strongest endorsement that the PA should lead Gaza. So is that the administration's view, and would that look something like pre-2006, or something different this time around? And does the PA's, their lack of popularity, does that raise any concerns?
So I think one, just to reiterate what I said to some of your colleagues, I'm not going to get ahead of this process as what this is about and what the Secretary's comments were about. We're laying out some longer-term objectives and pathways that'll help share our approach in addressing some of the immediate needs. But what I can say is something that is not new is that we have long felt that the governance of Gaza and the West Bank, of course, needs to be reflective of the will of the Palestinian people. We believe that puts the region on a pathway to Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in states of their own with equal measures of security, freedom, and opportunity. And that continues to be our point of view. And you saw the Secretary reiterate that this morning in Tokyo. Jackson, go ahead. I'll come back to you right after that.
Thank you so much, Vedant. Has the State Department prepared for a possible government shutdown in 9 days? What's the department's reaction to the House GOP wanting to pair supplemental Ukraine funding with border security? Would that only undermine Ukraine?
We believe that there is an imperative to continuing to support our partners in Ukraine who are defending their country and protecting their territorial integrity and sovereignty. We also continue to believe that there is an imperative to support our partners in Israel who are defending their security and have every right to defend themselves. Beyond that, I am not going to get ahead of the process as it relates to a potential lapse in appropriations. Our colleagues in Congress, I have no doubt, are working around the clock to ensure that doesn't happen. But should we march closer to that potential outcome, we will take appropriate steps to ensure that this department, this building here, as well as our missions and our consulates and embassies around the world, can take whatever appropriate steps they need to.
And the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, said in a meeting that he has said that he supports Ukraine aid. But so what is the department's reaction to this? Does this make getting supplemental aid through Congress easier?
Because he says he supports aid for Ukraine, you'd think that if the Speaker of the House says he supports aid for Ukraine, it would make that would be a good sign.
But even
Humaira, I answered two of your questions. I'm going to work through them. Humaira, go ahead.
Vedant, can I just go back to what Michelle asked?
Yeah.
Because I think he asked you if the United States believes that Israel can achieve its end goal, and that is eradicating Hamas. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you told him Israel has a right to defend itself, which is something that you guys have said multiple times. But I mean, and the Secretary has asked his Israeli counterparts about the end goal, and you guys also discussed with them the plans to achieve that end goal. So I want to ask, does the United States assess that Israel is going to be able to achieve that end goal or not?
Humaira, I think, again, you are asking us to predict and look into a crystal ball about something that is currently ongoing. I think what is important to remember, and what this is about, and the Secretary spoke a little bit about this on the trip, I believe, that you were on, is that this is about defeating and dealing with Hamas in terms of dealing with it physically, making sure that it is not in a place to repeat or redo or attack again the people of Israel just like it did on October 7th. I'm not going to parse into the specifics of this military operation, but there are track records and examples out there, Humaira, of the United States, of other countries, of coalition forces being able to degrade terrorist organizations to a point where their threat and their level of risk is not as much as it once was. And the best example I would give of that is how when we talk about the work that has been ongoing to degrade ISIS.
Right. Because the civilian casualties have been on the rise, I feel obliged to ask that. And when you say in a place that Hamas can no longer repeat October 7th, does the United States have a clear idea what that looks like then?
That is not for us to decide. We're not the ones carrying out this military operation. But again, we have long felt that Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas has used Palestinian civilians as human shields. It has used Gaza as a launching pad to attack Israel and the Israeli people. And so we believe that it's imperative that steps be taken to ensure that that can't happen again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. How long of a pause is the Biden administration demanding of Israel? Are we talking a few hours, a day, weeks, or months? And I have a follow-up.
So I just addressed this when answering Saeed's question. I'm not going to assign a time length or limit or longevity to our calls for a humanitarian pause. What our calls for a humanitarian pause are about are for allowing the conditions to be created so that Hamas cannot regroup and strengthen itself. That humanitarian aid can flow freely additionally into Gaza, and that conditions be created that will potentially allow for additional hostages to be released.
Okay, thank you, Vedant. Can you compare and contrast the two between a pause and a ceasefire? Because the lack of specificity is confusing.
Again, I spoke about this a little bit yesterday. I think it is less important to be focusing on the names here. I think a ceasefire, we believe, would allow Hamas to regroup and re-strengthen itself and allow it to carry out its very clearly stated intent of repeating the attacks of October 7th again and again and again. We believe a humanitarian pause will, our hope is, allow conditions in which hostages can be released, in which aid can flow into Gaza, and simultaneously not allow Hamas to strengthen itself. Alex, go ahead.
Thanks, man. Non-military related, if you don't mind.
Not I'm going to let Sam go, then I'll come back to you, because I suspect Sam's question is on the region.
Hamas? Sorry.
Not
please.
You also named Sam?
No, please. Oh, you said Sam's?
Thank you. What's your distinction between, well, first off, there was breaking news about a Red Cross truck being hit, apparently by Israel. Do you have knowledge?
I don't get notifications of that stuff when I'm up here, Sam, but I'm happy to check. And
several hours ago, I mean.
I don't have any specific updates on that specific report.
You accept Israel's premise that it is actually targeting Hamas and not the civilian population of the Palestinians in spite of all of this evidence?
We do. We accept the premise that Israel is undertaking a military operation to degrade Hamas, to target Hamas, and to do everything it can to hold Hamas accountable for its terrorist attacks on the Israeli people on October 7th.
The reports are of over 10,000 civilians and over 4,000 children.
Sam, I'm not disputing.
How many Hamas dead have they got?
Sam, I'm not disputing that there has been an immense impact on civilians over the course of this operation, that there have been an immense number of civilian casualties over the course of this operation. We have been very direct with our Israeli partners about the fact that there is an imperative to target Hamas terrorists and not civilians. And we will continue to raise that, and we have made so very clearly that we believe that there are additional steps that can be taken to minimize the impact on civilians. But your question was, do I take issue with their stated intent of targeting and undertaking Hamas? I do not.
No. I wasn't asking that at all. I was saying, do you accept at face value, in spite of all of the evidence?
We have no reason to not accept that Israel is undertaking an operation with a stated intent of targeting Hamas and degrading Hamas.
I know that's their stated intent. I'm just saying that the evidence of hospital after hospital and school after school undermines that, wouldn't you say?
Sam, we have been, this is not the first time you've heard me say this, we have been very vocal about the fact that steps need to be taken to minimize the impact on civilians. We recognize that there has continued to be an increasing impact on civilians over the course of this operation, and we'll continue to be very direct with our Israeli partners that this operation needs to and should be conducted in accordance with international law, and that there is a strategic and moral imperative to do so. But that does not change the fact that Hamas also is an entity that continues to use Palestinian civilians as human shields, that has integrated and co-located itself with schools, hospitals, and other critical civilian infrastructure. Hamas is a group and it's a terrorist organization that is bent on hijacking the political future of Palestinian civilians, and there is a clear track record of that.
I sent our exchange from Monday around to a series of international lawyers. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Falk. He's a very prominent international lawyer, taught at Princeton for years, was the UN rapporteur. He emailed back to me, Gaza remains, from the perspective of international law and the UN, an occupied Palestine territory subject to the Fourth Geneva Convention. I don't believe that Israel recognizes the Fourth Geneva Convention for all of these decades. I don't know what U.S. policy is on that question. So that's one question. This means that Israel is an occupying power and has a primary obligation to safeguard the safety of the civilian population. It is entitled to take reasonable, lawful measures to restore its security in the aftermath of such an attack, referring to October 7th. As such, it has no international legal right of self-defense. Even if it had such a right of self-defense, it wouldn't have no legal or moral basis for engaging in a genocidal assault, the character of which has been strongly confirmed by Israel's top leaders. Does the U.S. recognize the Geneva Conventions as applying to Palestinian territories?
Sam, what I'm just going to say is what you've heard us say before, is that we believe, well, that's the answer that I have for you, which is that we believe wholeheartedly that Israel has every right to defend itself and to defend its security, and what happened on October 7th would be unacceptable to any country, and steps must and should be taken. Steps must and should be taken to ensure that those events cannot be repeated. Now, I've taken 3 of your questions. I'm going to work the room a little. Alex, go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I have 2 topics, but before we dive into my questions, I want to ask if the department has any position on European Commission's decision today to grant 10-day status to Georgia, Moldova, and
Thanks for your question, Alex. We welcome this announcement from the European Commission on its recommendations on EU enlargement, and we strongly support the EU aspirations of the 10 candidate and aspirant countries that were recognized. This is, of course, as you know, Alex, an EU-led process, but we believe that this is a pivotal moment for the transatlantic community, and we encourage candidate and aspirant countries to seize the momentum to realize their full potential.
Thank you. Now to my topics. The arrest of Arif Yar, the reporter. Now we are approaching to 1 month. National Press Club today came up with a statement urging administration to immediately designate her case, her imprisonment as wrongfully detained. Where are you at this, and also any progress on your end to reach out to her in jail?
So, Alex, you've heard me speak about this before as it relates to the formal wrongful detention designation that this department uses. That is an active and ongoing process, and it is not something I'm going to speak to in specificity to any particular case.
There is an obvious example you can give us to demonstrate that this actually is an ongoing process.
I'm not going to speak to these specific processes, but if you look at the cases that we have been public about their wrongful detention designation, they did not always necessarily start out that way. It is a process. Sometimes it happens incredibly quickly. Sometimes the nature of the detention evolves, and we will take this process step by step.
Have you heard back from the Russians formally in terms of this case?
I'm just not going to get into the specifics of the diplomatic discussions, Alex.
Because there's an impression that we're allowing ourselves to be paralyzed, to paralyze this process, because terrorists of Russia, surprise, is not cooperating. Is that the case?
I'm just not going to speak to the specificity of the process, Alex, but I'm happy to check back and get back to you.
My final topic on Azerbaijan, Armenia. Anything on Special Advisor Barnard's trip to the region? What is he hoping to achieve this time around?
When we engage on these issues, Alex, what we bring at the forefront is our desire and hope to see peace between these two countries and a durable peace in the South Caucasus. I'm happy to check to see if there's some specific information that we can share from his trip, though. Lala, you've
On
had-
Yemen,
okay, then I'll come to you. Go ahead.
The Houthis in Yemen claimed to have shot down a U.S. drone over Yemeni territorial waters. Are you aware?
I've not seen that reporting, and I would defer you to my colleagues at the Pentagon to speak to that clearly. Lalit, go ahead. And then we probably need to wrap shortly, guys.
Change of subject, India and its neighborhood.
Sure.
Secretary would be in India this week for the 2+2 dialogue.
Yep.
What are the key issues to be on his agenda when he meets his counterparts in Delhi?
You've heard us speak about this before. India is a country that we have a deep partnership. This, of course, he'll be going for the 2+2 security dialogue with Secretary of Defense Austin. So I expect, of course, that deepening the security cooperation and partnership will be one of the many topics that are discussed. It was something that was obviously raised during Prime Minister Modi's state visit earlier this year. And I know the Secretary looks forward to being there and in engaging directly with his counterparts on this. But I'll let the trip take place before we talk more about it.
One more question
Yep.
on Bangladesh.
Yep.
Ahead of the elections, violence has increased in the country. I have seen a statement of both sides. The ruling party saying that those having ties with the Islamic terrorist groups are purposefully fomenting violence in the country. Ahead of the election, how confident you are of a free and fair elections in the country?
I'm not going to categorize or give the elections a grade from up here, Lalit, but you've heard us say this before, that what the United States wants for the Bangladeshi people is what we believe the Bangladeshi people want for themselves, which is a free and fair election, which are conducted in a peaceful manner. And we are engaging and will continue to engage with the government, with opposition candidates, with civil society, and other stakeholders to urge them to work together for the benefit of the Bangladeshi people.
I have a follow-up on this.
I'll go to you, then I'll come back to Sean, then we got to
Yeah, very short about visa 3C visa policy. I just wanted to tell you this is the third time in Bangladesh the general election is going to be held on time. It is very rare case in Bangladesh. For free and fair election, the US activated the 3C visa policy for Bangladesh to assist the election commission to conduct the election.
I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm just telling you that we are only 2 months away from the election. The opposition using political violence, arson, vandalism, killing armed police forces. And my question is that this 3C visa policy, when you will apply or I just wanted to make sure that USA will apply this 3C visa policy against the people that undermining the democratic election process in Bangladesh. Thank you.
I'm certainly not going to preview any designations or actions from up here, but again, our hope and our engagements are revolved around ensuring that elections in Bangladesh are free and fair. If you can keep it to 20 seconds, you can ask a follow-up on Bangladesh. Go ahead.
Yeah. On Bangladesh, already 8,000 over opposition activists is in jail, and three garments workers have been killed. I saw your statement for their minimum wages. And as USA does not support any political party over other, how does the US look? How does the US look at this scenario? The ruling party moving ahead for another one-sided election, and 2014 and 2018 election dropped out.
Again, I'm just not going to parse this situation specifically. As you so said, we do not support any political candidate or party in Bangladesh. Our hope, our desire, and what we continue to work towards and work around through our engagements with the government, through our engagement with opposition groups, civil society, and stakeholders, is that these elections be carried out in a free and fair manner. I'm gonna. Okay, go ahead.
Yesterday, a local government leader of the ruling party in Bangladesh has threatened publicly to beat U.S. ambassador in Bangladesh, Peter Hush, due to his outspoken role in for free, fair, and credible election. Can you provide insight into the level of threat and security concern facing the U.S. ambassador in Bangladesh and the embassy personnel, and what specific steps and security measures are being taken to ensure safety and diplomatic mission and the embassy personnel in
So
Bangladesh?
I'm going to address this broadly, which is that the safety and security of our diplomatic personnel and our diplomatic facilities is of utmost importance. I think such kind of violent rhetoric is deeply unhelpful. But beyond that, we expect the host government of any country to take all appropriate measures to maintain the safety and security of our personnel and our facilities. That is in line and per the country's obligations under the Vienna Convention and the diplomatic conventions that exist under that. Sean, you've had your hand patiently. Go ahead, and then we'll close up.
Sure, Sudan.
Uh-huh.
Two things. I mean, first of all, there's the Jeddah talks.
Yeah.
I know that there's a statement from the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. I mean, I read the statement, but can you characterize it? Is there disappointment that it didn't go further? I mean, these are also confidence-building measures that have already been in the works for some time. And more specifically, there have been a number of reports of more violence, particularly in Darfur. There's a communications blackout. I was wondering if the U.S. has eyes and ears somehow there to say what the situation is.
This is something that we're going to continue to work towards, Sean. The talks in Jeddah have remained focused on a narrow set of objectives to focus on the delivery of humanitarian assistance, establishing ceasefires, and to further and deepen confidence-building measures that we hope will result in a permanent cessation of hostilities. And this is something that we'll continue to work with the respective parties towards. I will also add, since you've given me the opportunity, the U.S. condemns in the strongest terms reports of killings on the basis of ethnicity by the RSF and its allied militias in West Darfur.
Just briefly, do you have more detail on what's happened in the past couple of days there in West Darfur? There have been a number of reports, but access is quite limited. So I wonder if the U.S. has some assessment about the level of violence.
We've seen reports of imminent large-scale attacks by the RSF on El Fasher, North Darfur. We've seen those reports also outline that there's subjecting of civilians to extreme danger. There's also extreme fighting that we've seen in Nyala, Zalangali, and elsewhere in Darfur as well, but I'm happy to see if we have any more specific updates. All right, thanks everybody.